A very good evening to you. I have in front of me a book which has just won the Alan Paton Award. It's called Rape, a South African Nightmare. And I have with me in the studio the author of this award-winning book. We say very good evening to Professor Pumla Dineo Gqola. Welcome and thanks for giving us your time tonight.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Before we get into the issues, let me just tell you how you can join in. 086 0000 959 36959. If you'd like to send us a text message, those cost R1.50. Join me on Twitter at John Perlman. You can also follow our guest at feminist_rogue. You'll see on my timeline that Pumla Gqola's Twitter handle is there as well. And you can go to the Today with John Perlman Facebook page and make a comment there. Professor Gqola, I want to start off by reading, I suppose, the first paragraph of chapter 1, although there is a long and very interesting introduction. It reads like this. Rape is not a South African invention, nor is it distasteful sex. It is sexualized violence, a global phenomenon that exists across vast periods in human history. Rape has survived as long as it has because it works to keep patriarchy intact. It communicates clearly who matters and who is disposable. Those who matter are not afraid of being raped because they've not been taught to fear sexual assault. They've been taught safety. Rape is the communication of patriarchal power, reigning in, enforcing submission, and punishing defiance. And there's more, but I want to start off with these two sentences. It keeps patriarchy intact. It communicates clearly who matters and who is disposable. Both of those seem central, and I wonder if you could flesh them out for us.
Certainly. Rape is both a crucial way in which patriarchy, the rule of the father or the rule of certain men, is maintained. Because in order for any system of oppression to work, you have to keep those you seek to oppress in place, in check. And a big part of how patriarchy does this is to terrorize those it seeks to control, minimize, oppress, and so on. Because fear is a very effective tool of submission. And so that's what I mean by, it helps keep some people, women, certain categories of vulnerable men, children in check. And it communicates if you live your life with the possibility of being raped. You expend an enormous amount of energy modifying your own movement. So you don't walk at night, you don't go to certain places, so you regulate yourself because the fear of rape works as powerfully so the fear of rape really becomes the possibility of rape. So if you're in danger of being raped, you keep yourself in you help the system keep you in check.
You devote, let's stay with fear because you devote a whole chapter to it and you call it the female fear factory. And let me just read one sentence from that. The threat of rape is an effective way to remind women that they are not safe and that their bodies are not entirely theirs. It's an exercise in power that communicates that the man creating fear has power over the woman who is the target of his attention. It also teaches women who witness it about their vulnerability, either through reminding them of their own previous fear or showing them that it could happen to them next. Has that set of circumstances that you describe got worse in South Africa?
Yes. I think that it's important on the one hand. It's important to recognize that, as I say in the first passage you read, that rape is in fact a global phenomenon. But at the same time, if you think about the extent to which in public space women are and other vulnerable sexual, whatever other groups that are vulnerable, are rendered vulnerable sexually, or powerless, are harassed. I'm often struck when I leave the country, when I go to Tanzania, when I go to Uganda, when I go to the US, or when I go to the UK, by the absence of constant sexual harassment. Now, I'm a middle-class woman who drives everywhere, so I'm obviously I don't experience sexual harassment as much as women who walk everywhere, who use public transport, or as I did when I was younger, and I did rely on public transport. Yet, even I encounter, and as do many women in this country, in South Africa, encounter this constant unwelcome attention that, on the one hand, parades as complimentary attention, but really communicates fear. So you're walking down the road minding your own business, and there's unwelcome attention, and the refusal to engage in receptive ways to that attention very often leads to a direct communication of threat. And that threat is sometimes a beating, but it is also very clearly, very often, the possibility of rape. So it's always the kind of communication of harm to your body, in the same ways that the harassment through words, through unwelcome attention, through being followed, already kind of communicates to you emotionally or psychically.
Let's bring that back then to a point where we started out, where you talked about this is part of a system that indicates who matters and who doesn't, who's important and who is disposable. And it's interesting that you say that despite the fact that you have some power and authority in society, both through being a member of an academic class, you drive, you don't walk, and so on. Nevertheless, there is an attempt to communicate to you, simply because you're a woman, that you don't matter. How do we find ourselves in that position after so many years of fighting for women's rights, enshrining them in our constitution, and in part measuring the progress of our democracy by the extent to which women have some say in it?
Well, I think two things are happening. I think that a large part of the sexual harassment that we encounter in our streets, in public spaces, in the workplace, is a continuation of older older layers of violence. But I also am starting to think, after several other people are saying in the South African context, people like Tendra Mtinso, for example, who suggest that, in fact, a big part of the virulent sexual harassment that women in South Africa suffer is, in fact, part of a backlash against precisely those gains. I mean, I think that many of those gains are an expression of our best possible selves as a society, as a country, and so on.
Yes.
They're not really a description of who we are. Like our grand constitution, they're aspirational, right? It's who we want to be. And they strategically, they're the successes in many ways of very clever strategy. In strategizing by kind of women's movements and certain kind of other kind of gender progressives in the building of our new society, and so they do not really enjoy widespread commitment. And although many people say they're opposed to rape,
yes,
I think very often we don't think closely enough, consistently enough about the connections between assuming you have access to women and can harass them and can harass men who love men and sleep with men and, or you assume are queer, the connection between that and the high rates of other kinds of gendered violence and homophobic violence in our society.
Now, right at the start, I said that you talked about this as a global phenomenon existing across vast periods in human history. That includes our history in South Africa. You're not anywhere in your book suggesting any of this began in 1994, 1990. And you have a chapter that's headlined, "What's Race Got to Do with Rape?" And you answer your own question in 3 sentences by saying there's a very simple answer to the question posed in the title of this chapter, and there is also a longer way to demonstrate that answer. The simple answer is everything. Somewhere between the simple and the longer way, clarify what you mean by everything.
Okay, so by everything I mean sexual violence is historically crucial to the making of a thing that is race. Right, so we live now in 2016, and we take for granted that we live in at a time where we know what race means. Even when people say, "Oh, but it's a social construct," they still nonetheless know that it has material effects. What you are, what race you are, and what race you are read as affects a whole range of things: economic, political, social, and so on globally. And because race is so pervasive, we sometimes battle to think about the fact that it's only 300 odd years old, right? That 400 years, 400 years ago, 500 years, 600 years ago, human beings did not have a thing called race. So race is a recent construct. And to say it's a recent construct in kind of the long kind of length that human beings have existed on Earth is to also say it was created and part of how race was created. The meaning of race, who matters, who does not matter, white supremacy was created, was through the enactment of sexual violence. Through deciding that, and we see this in a variety of ways, right? Through kind of the centrality that rape has in slave societies, in slave societies, through the celebration of colonial wars, through kind of the rape of the kind of the women of the vanquished armies or societies and so on, through the circulation of inferiority, through the measuring of bodies, through the kind of the measuring of and the mythologization of kind of bodies as sexual, but also of course through the speaking. Through the rendering of rape as metaphor in kind of colonial warfare. So people talk about the rape of the land and the rape of kind of colonial territory at the same time that they're raping the women of those places. So that's what I mean. So I'm saying, well, in the world, in the history of the world, as the world began to be a place where race is a thing rather than kind of other forms of difference that don't mean anything and that aren't structural in the same kinds of ways, rape was quite an important, and sexual violence was an important part of that. And so race is made through sexual violence. So it perhaps should be unsurprising then that not only in South Africa, but I mean, when we look at the stats that health organizations and women's movements globally circulate, is that the global average is that 1 in 3 women will be raped at least once in her lifetime, which is frightening. And those are the global stats. Ours are slightly higher because of our reporting rates. But of course, to say it's a global average means that there are places where women are being raped in numbers closer to ours than the 1 in 3.
Your book, Professor, talks about rape, and it talks extensively as well about what happens to people who have been raped and how we as a society treat them. And you say, rather poignantly right at the end of the book, I look forward to being able to talk about rape without shaming rape survivors. I'd imagine that was quite a painful sentence to write. Tell us what you were saying.
It's an incredibly painful sentence to write because rape is everywhere, right? As a woman in the world, as a woman in this society, it's something that I think about every day. It's something that is a big part of my life, in chosen and unchosen ways. But I also know how difficult it is to talk about rape without triggering. And by triggering, I mean, when you're talking about something that's kind of traumatizing, sometimes the mere mention, the mere thinking, the mere evocation of it can re-traumatize. And so I think it's an important conversation. We have to continue to talk about rape. At the same time, I think it's important to continue to try to broaden the conversation and deepen the conversation in ways that do not re-traumatize people who have survived rape, people who are or people who are experiencing kind of ongoing rape. And I don't know that I know how to do that. I don't know that any of us know how to do that, how to speak about rape in ways that do not trigger. Although I certainly tried as hard as I could in the book to write about rape in a way that does not secondary victimize.
Yes.
Right? Because I think there's so much of what happens to people who step up and say, I've been raped, is secondary victimization in their societies, in their families, certainly in the legal system, criminal justice system.
You're quiet tonight, Mkhaya. It's a powerful book, an important book, and a huge topic. I wonder what that silence is about. Maybe you want to call in and tell me why you're not calling in, if you know what I mean. 086 00 00 959. Professor, one of the things, just to continue with our theme about what happens to people after they're raped in the society and its response, you talk very troublingly about how, and let me just read it, perhaps this is the best way to explain it. We bestseller books lists are brimming with books penned by authors who've bounced back from bankruptcy to attain affluence, offering advice on how to also acquire wealth. We listen attentively to experts who've studied phenomena as they explain to us how things work and help us to make sense of what is in front of us. We think of first-hand accounts as more reliable than second-hand ones, make witnesses indispensable to fact-finding missions and court processes alike. But none of this applies to the testimony of those who have survived rape. When a rape survivor speaks of her own rape, she's only generally believable under very narrow circumstances. When she speaks about rape inflicted on another, she's assumed unreliable because she's too emotionally invested, biased, too quick to believe rape is widespread. What's that about? Why does that happen? Is that a deliberate attempt to limit the conversation around this issue as much as possible?
Yes, that's definitely part of it. It's also because rape, as we said at the beginning, is such a crucial part of the toolkit of patriarchy. It's also a way of not taking it seriously, right? So if you constantly disbelieve those people who say they've been raped, then in many ways rape can continue unfettered, uninterrupted, without real consequences in the main. And so rape then works, and speaking about rape and speaking the experience of being raped worked in this kind of counterintuitive way, where if I walked in here and I said someone had slapped me in the street, most people would probably be shocked and wonder what's going on and take me seriously. It wouldn't occur to people to not believe me unless, especially to people who don't know me. In fact, people who know me and people who don't know me. If I walk in here and I say someone stabbed me or someone drove into my car, people generally believe me until someone comes up and says, no, I didn't, actually a truck did, or whatever, comes up with an alternative narrative. And yet with rape, the exact opposite happens, and I think some of it has to do with what we've already talked about what rape is for in the world.
Yes.
But I think also part of it has to do with how rape works, with this shame, and because rape works as though it is sex. Whereas in fact it is violence, it is not, and so I think the mystification and our queasiness generally to talk about sex in fact spills over into this thing that actually isn't sex at all, because we in large part think about rape as a kind of sex, as a kind of bad sex rather than as a kind of violence, precisely because the violence happens very often through genitalia or through kind of some sexual language, and we give primacy to the tools of rape than to the experience of rape. Whereas in fact, if we think about rape alongside sex, and we think about rape alongside other forms of violence, we'll see that rape actually has much more in common with a stabbing than it does with perfectly consensual, inappropriate, interesting, whatever sex, right? Between adults, and that in fact, yes, and so that the sexual organs in a rape function in the same way that a knife might in a stabbing, and we don't spend forever thinking that there's an association between a stabbing and butchery, or slaughterhouses, or those kinds of things,
or hunting. Yes.
Yes.
Kingsley on Facebook takes us in a different direction and says this: my concern is that our behavior and conversations in a largely patriarchal society continue to almost promote a rape culture. As men, we ridicule other men who respect their partners when they say no. We're even more relentless in our ridicule of men who are victims of rape. It's my humble opinion, Kingsley continues, that it starts with fathers teaching their sons from a young age how to treat a woman like a lady. It's up to fathers to be the high standard against which their little girls will someday measure every man they encounter. In short, it's time for men to step up and begin to reverse what has become a vicious cycle. There's a lot about men in your book, Professor Gqola. Where do you want to start with Kingsley's observations? Because he's taking you in a number of directions, many of which you cover.
Yes. Thank you for that, Kingsley. I think that I agree with several things that Kingsley says. I think, though, that, society, yes, fathers raise sons, mothers raise sons, relatives raise sons, societies raise sons. And I think that a big part of ending rape culture is in fact in how we raise boys and how we hold adult men accountable. I don't know that it is something that is kind of raising. I mean, I think children, and in our society, I mean, if we look at the stats, most boy children aren't being raised by fathers alone. They raise in a variety of ways. Nonetheless, I think that we do pressure on boys to be a certain kind of a human being starts very, very, very early. I parent a boy. And it struck me and the child's and my son's other parent quite early on how much even strangers were willing to enforce, suggest, sometimes in ways that seemed loving and gentle, what appropriate boyhood and manhood would be. So, for example, I remember when he was, 2, and we were at the Pick and Pay, and he was crying and doing what, the impossible behavior that tired 2-year-olds perform. And I remember how many people, in trying to supposedly comfort our son, said things like, "Come on, you're a soldier. Soldiers don't cry. Toughen up. It's okay. Don't cry. Be a boy. You're a man. Men don't cry." And I think this kind of bullying into not accessing a range of emotions and not being fully human. Because, I mean, men, women, trans people, human beings, to be human is to feel a whole range of untidy feelings. And so I think that yes, so Kingsley's onto something when he says, well, we need to think about how we're talking about what a man is, what masculinity is, how men respond to other men. And what is demonized, what kind of intimacy between men, sexual and otherwise, are demonized and deemed unmanly, and who gets brutalized for being loving to his friends, to his sons, to his cousins, to his partner. But I think, and I think also it has and so of course children watch by modeling. And grown men know what is likely to get them benefits in a patriarchal society, or allow them to pass under the radar in a patriarchal society, and what's likely to get them brutalized. But also, of course, as part of thinking about relationships across gender, when we're thinking across gender in kind of heterosexual relationships, a big part of that idea of what an appropriate sexual relationship or romantic relationship is in fact, very troublingly, rape culture. The idea that a real man pursues and a real woman does not make herself available immediately. That in fact, desirable heterosexual women pretend. So this idea that when women say, and that's really where the idea that when women say no, they don't mean no, and that real men don't take no for an answer. And I think that's also a big part of what we're getting wrong, because we have these campaigns that are very well-meaning that say real men don't rape. But that's quite confusing, because everywhere else, society is saying real men don't take no for an answer. Real men pursue and pursue and pursue and pursue and pursue. And there's a very thin line between saying don't take women seriously when they say when they tell you what they want, and rape. And in fact, you cannot have one without the other.
So Javalani on Twitter says the painful part about rape is that more often, victims are raped by people who should shield them. Unforgettable experience. Lerato is calling us from Kwatimuk. Hi, Lerato.
Good evening, John, and good evening to the professor.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for the interesting topic. And I think just from my end, I'm actually taken aback at how the professor has deconstructed the concept of rape. Because till today, just to give you a brief background, I think, and I still struggle with the fact that I actually experienced rape. But in my mind, I cannot accept that I was raped, because you expect rape to be so brutal, you expect it to be so painful and whatnot, but it happened to me. I was in varsity, I was half drunk, and it was with someone that I trusted, and he took advantage of me. But I thank this topic, because slowly but surely I'm getting to the point where as I said previously, I struggled over many years to actually accept that I was raped, because to me it just felt like, okay, he was like someone that was asking me out, and yeah, well, that meant then that he could do what he did to me. And I think that's the problem in society today, that so many situations that are meant to be deemed as raped are in actual sense sort of deemed to be normal, and that also then leads to the problem where you find many cases don't get reported, because in our minds we tell ourselves that perhaps this is how sexual behavior is supposed to be, when in actual essence it's not. So I would just like to say thank you for the topic, and I would really like to read your book, and hopefully it will give me some closure and just understanding of what it is that I went through, and just accept that what I went through was a violation. Thank you.
Professor?
Thank you very much, Lerato, for that call. I think I more and more in my own life, and since writing this book, I am convinced that what you went through, your rape, how you're talking about having felt, is in fact much closer to the way in which most women experience rape, most people experience rape, than the held up idea of someone who gets dragged by a stranger from a bush and gets attacked, and whose body then bears very clear bruising and cutting and so on. And I think also so thank you very much for sharing that, for sharing your story. I think also in addition to that, I mean, one of the things that you said that kind of struck me is that sense of sitting and being embattled about whether you should and can call your rape a rape.
Yes.
Because it did not look like what society was saying rape looks like, because it was someone you knew. And in fact, all evidence that we have globally, not just in South Africa, suggests that most women are raped by someone that they know. Sometimes that they're friends with, sometimes that they found attractive, sometimes that they're in a relationship with or were in a relationship with. And so we have to absolutely continue to debunk the myth of stranger rape. Stranger rape happens. Yes, people got jackrolled, but the vast majority of rapes across the world are by people. Rapists are known to the woman that they rape, to the child that they rape, to the young man or trans person that they rape. So thank you very much for your call, Lerato.
So Lerato, just in answer to your question, or rather you're saying you'd love to read the book. The book, by the way, is published by our very own Melinda Ferguson, who's done a brilliant job, and I'm sure is hugely proud of winning the Alan Paton Award with this book. But Lerato, they've kindly given us a copy to give away, which will be on its way to you. We've got your details, and we'll send that through to you. And Jabulu says the frightening thing is that some mothers actually ignore when their girl children are raped by uncles, partners or stepdads. Just to remind you, we're talking to Professor Pumla Dineo Gqola. She's the author of the book Rape, a South African Nightmare. The point Lerato was raising and what you said as follow-up, Professor, also takes us into another area of your book where you engage with this idea that some rapes are worse than others, and that some, like the raping of babies or grandmothers, is inexplicable, and others, therefore by implication, are slightly more understandable. And you take strong issue with us. Take us through that.
Yes, absolutely. I think that we will all have noticed this. I think this, the people we in conversation with will recognize this. Every now and again, there's a rape in our community or in our society. It gets our attention, and there's enormous outcry. So we recognize that rape happens every day in our society. And then there are rapes that get our attention, that provoke an outcry. And we often think about these rapes as particularly brutal. In fact, some judges in court cases have said things like, well, this is a particularly brutal, or this is not a particularly brutal court case. But in fact, I think that I argue that there's a significant problem with thinking about certain rapes as particularly brutal. Because if we consider certain rapes particularly brutal, we have to, by implication, accept that some rapes are in fact not brutal.
And almost normalized.
And normal and acceptable. And in fact, in a society where we think that rape is sometimes okay, we're going to continue to have a rape culture. And very often the rapes we think are particularly brutal are ones where we again insisting on thinking about rape as sex. So those rapes of people that we consider or we construct as not sexual. So when we think about the rape of babies, we think, what kind of person would be aroused by a baby? Because we think about it as having inappropriate sex with a baby. Or we think about rape with old people and babies are pre-sexual, and we always imagine, although somewhat puzzlingly for me,
yes,
that old people are post-sexual, which I don't know, I'm not old yet, but I'm pretty sure this is not accurate. And so so when we think about these rapes as particularly horrific, we're in fact saying something about our difficulty to think about these people as sexual beings. But we're in fact missing the point. We're missing the point because the thing that enables someone to rape a baby is the same thing that enables someone to rape a grown woman or a young woman or a young man. It is the fact that he can. It is the fact that he can attack and he can get away with it and knows so, that there isn't enough of a disincentive. So it isn't an arousal, if it in fact is an arousal at all, that is significantly different from how rape happens in other instances. And I think is when we start to confront that, then we can, we begin to think about rape in a significantly different way, and we begin to think about how to stop it in a different way.
We're talking about the award-winning book, Rape, a South African Nightmare, that is authored by Pumla Dineo Gqola. And Joy is joining us, calling in on 086 0000 959. Hi, Joy.
Hi, John, and hi to your guest. Just quickly, John, I think, rape is a societal issue, and, that will take time to deal with because I don't control what you do in your house and how you raise your kids and so forth. But what is important for me is the same efforts that the government is putting on destigmatizing HIV/AIDS and rolling out programs for HIV/AIDS and really putting billions of rands into HIV/AIDS treatment is the same effort that is needed by our government to begin to destigmatize rape so that our women can feel safe when they've had these offenses happen to them, to be able to go to the police and not be afraid of being, being treated in a certain way, or not being afraid of having to encounter a male officer because they've just been raped by males and so forth. So I think until our government takes it as serious as they take HIV/AIDS, we are going nowhere, John. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Professor, before I get you to answer Joy's call, I just want to read out for people something you say right at the front of your book in the introduction, talking about, yes, the importance of the criminal justice system, but you also say this: it's time to apply pressure on men who rape, those who make excuses for rapists, those who make rape jokes, and you put the word jokes in inverted commas, and to pressure our government, yes, to create a criminal justice system that works to bring the possibility of justice to rape survivors and all other survivors of violence. And then you go on to say the silence we must now break is the silence around the identities of the rapists in our midst. It is no longer acceptable or convincing to pretend that men who rape women, children, and other men are a small fringe minority of men we do not know. And it seems to me you're saying something very, very powerful and I would think for many people unsettling there. You're saying it can't just be a matter of the courts, but if not that, then what?
I think we have to create a social cost to rape. So first of all, we have to completely stop pretending that rapists are mysterious, I like to say mysterious aliens who fly in, rape lots of women, children, some men, trans people, and so on, and then get back on their spaceship and they flee, and we, poor earthlings, have inadequate technology to chase up with them. If we take seriously the statistics that we know, that we have on rape, if we take seriously that we live in the midst of a rape culture, then we have to recognize that many men rape. And if we say many men rape, a significant percentage of men rape, then we also have to recognize that we know rapists. That rapists are people we love, people we know, people we choose to have sex with, people we birth, people we hang out with. And ending rape and forcing our society to shifting ourselves into a society that takes rape seriously is going to require that we hold those men that we know as rapists, to be rapists, to account, that we hold them responsible. And that, in fact, we stop placing so much burden on, because South Africa continues to speak about rape survivors needing to break the silence. There is no silence. There is no silence. We know rape is a pandemic, is endemic in our society. And so the silence then seems to be about who the rapists are. If most women in South Africa are likely to be raped at least once in their lifetimes, then we have to face the facts about what the numbers tell us about who the rapists are. Unless we're saying there's 100 men in South Africa that routinely rape, in which case we still know who those people are. And so we need to create a social cost. Because currently, people, men accused of rape enjoy enormous safety. They know that people will more likely than not come to their defense, whether they know them personally or not, whether they have any reason to do so or not, that the burden of evidence is always placed on the person that says that she has been raped. And so we need to create a social cost. We need to create a social cost in the same way that we would. If you had someone who routinely went out and stabbed people in your family, you wouldn't then treat them as though nothing had happened. If you had someone who was raping who was kind of, I don't know, like pouring hot water on all the children in your family, you wouldn't then pretend it wasn't happening. You would ostracize that person. You would kick that person out of your house. You would break up with that person. You would not invite that person into your home. You would not let that person attend your family funerals and family weddings. There would be a cost. There would be a cost that would also, I think, in some parts, be a deterrent, because if you know the cost, I often say, perhaps the reason most of us don't rob a bank is not because we wouldn't like to have the money in the bank, but because we think, oh my God, do I really want to go to jail? Do I want that life? There would be consequences to that. We need to create the same kinds of consequences for rapists, and not simply leave it to the legal justice system, although the criminal justice system does have a responsibility, and it is a big part of the problem.
Snowy on 36959 has this to say: John, the eloquence and demystifying by the professor about fears and experiences of most women is stunning in both meanings of the word, from catcalls to fear of excelling, because it seems that the empowerment of women equates to the emasculating of men. Thanks for speaking on our behalf. That thing of catcalling, you in the book talk about what some people might describe as normal heterosexual play, the grabbing of a woman's arm, the pursuit. That seems to be what Snowy's saying, that there in some ways is a continuum, that the one is not necessarily the same as rape, but it's connected to it in an attitude. Is that a fair interpretation of what she's saying and what you're writing?
Absolutely. I think so. I'm not saying, there is obviously room for sexual play, which, if it is play, has to be consensual and creative and interesting. And this is not about kind of enforcing my idea of morality, whatever that may be.
Yes.
It is about power. It is about violence. It is about recognizing that when fear when the fear of a further violation is part of how desire is communicated, except in very kind of controlled circumstances where both people then kind of sign on for kind of, so obviously I imagine that there are people who are aroused by fear in kind of consensual.
Yes.
But outside of those, we have to think about the power that's at play. If you have to terrorize someone into listening to how you desire them, we have to start doing the work as a society of thinking about what that does, how it face it puts to desire, what it says about our relationships to our bodies and to ourselves, and what it does to consent. Because currently what it does, if you grow up in a context where people twist your arm in order to get your attention, where you get catcalled, where you get inappropriate kind of comments from your colleagues about, as we saw, kind of a few years ago in the kind of that explosion of sexual harassment and so on, and that goes on in many other contexts. Part of what it does, it is in fact kind of normalizes this idea of women living uncomfortably in our own bodies. And in fact, what it really does, it tells us quite clearly that our bodies do not belong to us, that we do not belong to ourselves. So you have to make yourself smaller in order to escape violence. Except, of course, it's a con, because you can never do anything to escape violence and behavior that is actually controlled by someone else altogether.
Nomvula responds to the fact that we don't have any calls and says this: the silence from Abomkaya on the rape discussion between John Perlman and Professor Gqola is telling of how we deal with rape culture in South Africa. Professor, one of your chapters deals with President Jacob Zuma's rape trial, and I want to just read what you say about it in the introduction. Before the President Zuma rape trial, I was much more hopeful about our fight against rape as a society, even confronted by the statistics. I believed most people when they said they opposed rape, even though I was very aware of South African hypocrisy when it comes to gender power. After the trial, having witnessed what happened outside, how far people were willing to go to terrorize a woman in defense of a powerful man, it is clear to me that something drastic needs to change before this culture consumes us whole. Correct me if I'm wrong, in my reading of the chapter, you take no specific issue with the verdict, but with what happened around the trial, if I'm correct.
In the chapter, I'm interested much more because I'm interested in the court case, but I'm much more interested in how we as a society perpetuate rape culture.
So what troubled you about that instance?
What troubled me was how a woman could say, this man raped me. And because this man was famous and popular and known and beloved and had a long history of being an activist, hundreds and thousands of people would automatically come to the defense of that man, a man that most people didn't know. I mean, if we look at some of the interviews and some of the material I read in that chapter, we have a range of kinds of support. Some people say, well, there's no way someone like this, who is this popular, who is this charming, who is this famous, who is this activist, could rape. Some people say, well, I mean, come on, he's a powerful man, and powerful men don't need to rape because anybody will, at any given point, they have an array of people who will have sex with them. Then there are people who say, I don't care if he raped or not, we need this man, and this silly woman must just go away because we need this man, and rape is just a small thing. He's done 500,000 important things, and so he messed up here, and she must just be sorted out. And in various ways, all of those people are saying they are willing to completely disbelieve a woman who says she's been raped, but even more than that, they're saying they're willing to be part of publicly showing that they don't believe her, publicly shaming her, and publicly kind of secondary victimizing her, right? And part of what, and I was struck by, what does that say in a country where we have the rape statistics that we have? What does that say to the millions of women who are watching this case, who have been raped, who are thinking about supposedly breaking the silence that rape survivors are kind of burdened with? What is the incentive to break the silence if you're watching thousands of ordinary people say rape actually doesn't matter? And I think that part of taking responsibility as a society is looking at ourselves in the eye, in the mirror, and I feel like that case held up a mirror to our faces. And in fact, we see what happened in the rape in the Jacob Zuma rape trial outside the court as well as inside the court is in fact very similar to it's the archetypal. It was in the public glare because of how prominent the man accused of rape was, but in fact it carried on along very similar,
yes,
very typical kind of rape case trials.
Boy, we've come to the end of the time we have. I have a whole lot of questions, but I do not have any minutes in which to ask them. Suddenly, people are calling in. Suddenly, people want to make comments. Suddenly, people are saying lots and lots and lots of things on Twitter. And we simply don't have time, except to perhaps read Mfundisi, who says boys and men should be taught being a woman doesn't mean she is a sex object. They need to start treating women as equals. Professor Gqola, many, many thanks. It's all we've got time for, but we'll have to do this again. Thanks for joining us on 95.9.
Thank you very much, John Perlman. It's been a pleasure.